think this is the time for elevator music.
Brenda, maybe you could text the director, and maybe he's having trouble connecting.
That's what I'm doing now.
Thank you.
I have not heard back from him yet.
Yeah, let's wait a few more minutes and give him some time to get on. Hopefully he'll be here.
Yeah, unfortunately, I deleted all my elevator music off my phone.
No, I'll eat my fruit.
It's like I thought.
I know I'm muted, never mind.
Oh.
Okay, it'll just be a moment. He is just running just a couple minutes late. Should be joining us soon.
Hey, I just got a request from Director Cepeda to start at 12:30. Is there a way that we can keep the meeting on, or wait till 12:30 to start if that's available?
Either way is fine with me. I could feed my gut, Harry too, at any
Mhm.
time. So this would be appropriate.
So we're just adjourning it to 12:30.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do it that way.
Yeah, do I have to make it official?
Brenda could as well, but I would just say, should we just keep this on? And Brenda, you can just put a notice up on the screen that says adjourn until 12:30. Then if anybody joined, they can join at 12:30. Is that all right?
Sure, I will put a notice up right now.
Perfect. Okay, we'll see you back here at 12:30. Thanks, guys.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
12:30.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I deeply apologize that I am late here. Thank you for your flexibility.
Okay. Okay, so we'll start with roll call. Director Weiner?
Mouth is full, here.
Thank you. And Chair Cepeda?
Here.
Thank you. Next item, public comment. Items not on the agenda. Chair Cepeda, we did not receive any public comment. I do see, however, one person on the attendee list. If that person does have any public comment, if they can raise their hand. Seeing none raised, we do not have any public comment. Next item, matters from staff and general manager. Reserves policies, presentation, overview, and proposed modifications of reserve policies.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, Vice President Cepeda and Director Weiner, Justin Lovell, Director of Administrative Services. So this item, I know that from the committee, there was some discussion a month or two ago about looking at our existing reserves. We've also have some potential modifications that that we would, as staff, we would like to make based on the work that a consultant that's doing our sewer rate study and financial forecast would like to do. So I think I'll just briefly go over the existing reserves. That the most recent policy was adopted in 2015 by the board. So what was attached to the agenda packet today was a marked track changes of the existing reserve policy with some of the modifications that we would like to make. And then we can also just discuss with the committee if there's any specific policies or things that we want to add here before going back to the board about our reserves policies. I mean to just share my screen just so we can all see the same thing here, just so we can go over it. We just made a few changes within the language of the old policy. What we did is the GFOA, which is a Governmental Finance Officers Association, which is kind of the international, the national body that helps look at different kind of accounting and financial issues for governmental agencies. You know, so some of the terms periodically they change on what some of them would mean. So what I'm recommending is we'll be adding what would we call committed reserves, and essentially that's just making the distinction that they are these are reserves that have been authorized by the board. But the board can make that policy decision, and they can change and use those reserves however they feel fit. These were two of these, encumbrance reserve and insurance fund reserve, were previously classified under what were called the restricted. And restricted are really kind of legal reserves, that there's some other statute that are governing the need to put certain monies into reserve. And so our only restricted reserves right now are related to our loans from the State Water Resources Control Board, part of the SRF fund. There is a requirement to maintain 1 year of debt service as a reserve. So what we have, I'm not recommending any changes. The encumbrance reserve, it's a nature of kind of as very typical about for our accounting system, whenever we have a contract or some sort of purchase order, that if we don't spend that all in that one fiscal year, that we can roll over that amount into the next fiscal year. And so the encumbrance reserve essentially reserves the money that was set aside in that fiscal year and moves it to the next fiscal year, essentially with encumbrance reserve. Insurance fund reserve, it's essentially what our deductible would be for our different insurances that we have with the California Sanitation Risk Management Association, or CSRMA. So we're not recommending any changes to that reserve. We're just recommending changes to the restricted reserve. And then we want to change it from state revolving fund reserves to just debt reserves, is knowing that we may be going into other types of debt in the near future. We just want to create it more general and say this is a reserve that we would hold and keep the amount as set aside by any of our agreements that we've issued debt. So currently it's just with the Water Resources Control Board. The other one, what we're calling it, so GFOA, since we are what is called, for accounting purposes, we are called an enterprise fund. So essentially we operate as a business. We're receiving fees for a service is kind of for accounting purposes how they're categorized. And so within GFOA, I just want to call working capital is just the term of just saying how much, what's our liquidity, what's available that we have set aside after accounting for all our other obligations. So we want to make a recommendation to modify the current operating reserve list that it should be 90 days of operating expenditures. We, based on our current financial forecast work that we're doing with the consultants, we're recommending that we change that and have a target reserve of 6 months of operating expenditures. This is to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to fund our operations between the period when we're receiving the bulk of our revenue. So we essentially go for 6 months with no revenues within the way we operate. And so making sure that we have 6 months, that will ensure that if we get to a point where we have the minimum reserves that we need, that this will cover our cash flow needs for a period of time. So we'll always make sure that we have money to be able to pay for our bills as they come due. Then we're also making some recommended changes into the capital reserve. With our capital expenditures increasing pretty significantly over these next couple of years. As I've mentioned before, we have a $190 million capital program that's over 10 years. That's our estimated expenditures. The way the current reserve is saying that we need to have 6 months of budget expenditures. But if we're starting to spend $20 million or $25 million in 1 year, it'd be really challenging to set aside $12 million to really in 1 year to comply with this reserve. And so it's because of the nature of the fluctuations with our capital program, we want to make some changes to this reserve and say it's 50% of our cash funded capital projects. So that way, if we do go out and loan and borrow money for particular projects, this is really just covering us to make sure that we can continue project delivery in between, periods of time when we're waiting to receive additional revenues. So it's just cleaning that up. The other reserve that we are that I've heard the board, some board members talk about in the last year is about an emergency reserve. As we have had issues with, force main failures, making sure that that we have sufficient cash on hand, essentially, to help pay for any of these emergencies. We're recommending to put in an emergency reserve. I'm putting in a recommendation of 7% of annual operating expenditures, which it's about 1.5 million, which is this way, this percentage target just gives us a number. It's going to fluctuate year to year, but it'll have some bearing pretty close to what we're recommending to keep into an emergency reserve. And so this reserve would be to cover the, as mentioned here, the unanticipated cost of catastrophic losses, natural disasters, accidents, just failures within the general infrastructure. The other one the equipment replacement reserve is essentially in a separate policy right now in the equipment and vehicle replacement policy. And so I'm recommending that we put the equipment replacement reserve language directly in the overall reserves policies. So we're not making many changes to what the reserve is. Currently, it is there is, based on the existing policy, is the depreciated value of the capital equipment and vehicles would be deposited into that equipment replacement reserve, and then we've added a target value that we should have at least 80% of the full replacement cost of the vehicles. And so this reserve will be paying for the our new equipment that we're purchasing. So it's essentially think of it as our savings account, and then we'll replenish it. Every year we'll be looking at it to make sure that we have sufficient funds inside the reserve. And lastly, one of the recommendations also have is looking at excess funds, as we do have several obligations, really mostly from the pension and our unfunded accrued liability, as well as OPEB, which is our other post-employee benefit liabilities, that if we do have excess funds after we've fully funded all these reserves, that we would like the board to consider that we put some of our excess money into to paying off some of these other liabilities. And so this goes into additional pieces that decisions that the board could make in the future about how do we want to handle these other liabilities. But I'm just recommending that we put this in here just so we have an option and a direction if we do have a little bit more funds than what we really need to based on the current reserve policies. So this is pretty much all the changes. I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can have some further discussion about our reserves.
Thank you, Justin. Director Wienert, any questions, comments?
Yeah, just one. Justin, which fund? I know we've been reorganizing and trying to get our capital expenditures going, and now that we've finally got the organization that could spend the money and control the money, it's time for us to spend the money. So which fund contains all that deferred spending that we raised our rates to cover, but have not had the chance to spend? Which fund would contain that?
So generally that is for accounting purposes. We really have one fund is kind of if we need to look at it like from our annual financial report. All for accounting individually, we may have different fund numbers just to help us separate them. It's all within our what we would call the operating fund. So we have, and that's where all of our cash lives, if you want to think of it that way, as we're keeping track of all the money that we have within our bank account at Mechanics Bank, as well as within LAIF, which is the state local agency investment fund, which is operated through the California State Controller's Office. That's where we maintain any of our money that we don't immediately need, and so we can earn a small interest, on the LAIF account. So it's that's kind of physically where the money is, and we account for it within. It's essentially a fund called kind of pooled cash, but it's all within our kind of operating capital kind of funds there. I don't know if that quite answers your question. I don't want to get too into it. We have it within our accounting. So all the money that hasn't been spent yet is kind of it's in a fund in our accounting system.
Yeah, no, I understand that we have the money. I'm not looking for the money. I know we have the money. I just we're kind of like in the reverse position of having a lot of reserves because we haven't been able to spend the money as fast as we'd like
Right.
to. And so I know we have the money. That's not the issue. In fact, I think we have too much money. And so I was just wondering if there was a specific fund that contained the too much money so that we know, or we can just look at that fund and say, okay, that's where our too much money is.
It's partially, when we look at it kind of holistically that way, it would, what we categorize as undesignated. So when we're looking at our financial reports, as part of our budget or a mid-year update, that would be designated as it would be called an undesignated fund balance, essentially.
Undesignated fund.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Weiner. Any other questions, Director Weiner?
Not at this time. I thought I think that both of the documents are self-explanatory, and I didn't have any additions or comments on the substance of them.
Perfect. I just have a couple of questions. The uninsured property losses, Justin, would you mind telling me a little more about what that is?
Right. So part of our insurance that we participate in, there's a property program. So essentially, it would be our deductible. For when we have an insurance claim against any losses, and so that reserve would essentially is paying for our deductible amount, and that's kind of what our maximum deductible would be if it was an insurance claim.
Okay, and that's any property on there. Thank you. Under the emergency reserve, I just wrote some notes here. Under the emergency reserve, two things on it. One, that paragraph might need to be looked at a little more closer. I think there's a grammatical error in there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then, are we able to get insurance on this? I mean, I know that we have a reserve for emergencies, but there's also insurance that can help us cover in case of an emergency, such as earthquakes, whatever things happen.
So some of them may be covered by our insurance, depending on the nature of what happened, right? Like, if it's, but a lot of it we would go out, we use our insurance if there was a claim about it to help repair some of our facilities. And so it's, case by case, but there may be some instances where, insurance wouldn't cover 100% of the cost. And we want to make sure that we have some money set aside so that we can get that facility or that, the equipment operating, back into full use.
Okay, thank you. And then for the OPEB, have we looked at ways to lowering our liability there? I'm not sure how much liability we have. I thought we were keeping on top of it, but do we?
Our OPEB is, we're doing pretty well. We're 90% funded. So based on the actuarial studies, we have, so just to back up a little bit, we do, in 2009, the board at the time approved the opening of what's called a 115 trust. So 115 is a section of IRS code that governs kind of that kind of accounts. And so that is essentially a trust fund that we're able to earn interest on for the OPEB liability. And so based on the performance of that and the amount that employees are paying into it. So all the employees that were started after 2013, depending on the position, it's either 1% or 2% of their salary is going into this OPEB trust. Plus, the district is paying a portion as well, based on the actuarial study. Currently, it's about 14% of pay is going into that trust, and so we are pretty well funded compared to, I think, some other public agencies for that particular liability. And so I think over time, we have an ability to pay in a little bit more and into that 115 trust and to monitor and just to look at it. Any changes to the actual benefit would have to go through bargaining and through our MOU process, because that is a bargained benefit for employees. to have that, have retiree medical if they have so many years within the agency. But it's something to look into if that's the direction of the board, in the future.
Thank you. Director Weiner?
If by some miracle we got a universal single payer, would that be would our liability be affected by that?
It's hard to say, depending on what what that would look like. So I really couldn't say if our liability would be different or change, or if we would still owe on that or not. It's kind of too speculative for me right now to make weigh an opinion on that one.
Thank you, Justin. Good presentation. I think, Director Weiner, any other questions on this particular topic? No?
I'm good.
I think that was very clear and concise, Justin. Good job. I think that I have no suggestions for presenting it to the full board. I think that it was very clear and on point there.
Could I just ask then, would the committee then make a motion to recommend this to the board?
Yeah. Director Weiner, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the language was good. I didn't have any questions about it or the concepts. I thought it was good changes and a better way to keep track of everything. So I'm good.
Yeah. Claire, do we need a motion? We don't have, there's just two of us. Do we just go by?
So one nice thing about making a motion is only that if you make a motion and it's seconded, it's by acclamation essentially. And then when we appear at the board meeting next time, it sort of gives some nice continuity. So when this is raised and Justin can provide his report to the district as a whole, then you and Director Weiner could say, this was reviewed in the Finance and Administration Committee meeting, and we recommend its approval, and then you guys could be the first and second. So it does provide some continuity if you'd like to do it that way. There's no rule in our rules and regs that says you have to do it that way, but it's one of your options to take action in that way that's a recommendatory action to the board.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I like it. Director Weiner, would you like to make a motion?
I do. I move that we accept this report as is and approve of it.
And recommended to the board for adoption.
Okay, and recommended to the board for adoption.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll second it.
All right. And then you don't need to vote since it's just the two of you.
Better not change your mind, Harry.
So far, so good. So far, so good. But when you get old, things just rapidly decline.
Thank you. Next item, debt management policy, presentation on the proposed debt management policy.
Okay, well, our next policy, as it's called, is debt management policy. This is really something that we're required to have, as we're moving forward and looking at issuing debt to pay for our capital projects. So it's pretty comprehensive. It lays out pretty much all of the circumstances that we would potentially issue debt, the types of debt that we may have, some of the processes that we would use to go forward and issue debt. So I don't know if, maybe it's just easier if I just open up and open up to questions as on particular processes or what this would mean for us. But I'll stop there and just see if you had any specific questions just about the policy itself.
Harry, any questions, comments?
Well, I guess my concern is kind of more of a universal concern, not about specifically this document. Right now, we have a situation where there's tons of capital floating around with nothing to invest in. And that's part of the reason rates are so low. So I wouldn't want to give away too much of the store in order to get money at a low rate, since there are very since our investing in us would be very desirable with our cash flow and et cetera. So in the negotiation, I hope that our representatives take that into account. Other than that, all of these policies are meant to prove that we are worthy of borrowing money. and I agree that we should make ourselves as worthy as possible, but I would like us to consider the given situation so that we don't give away too much.
Thank you, Director Weiner. I have no questions at this time on that policy. Justin, I think it's a good job so far.
Okay. So I think similar to the last policy, if there's no questions or concerns about it, then I would recommend that you make a motion so we can bring it to the full board for adoption.
Perfect. Director Weiner, would you like to make the motion and I'll second it?
It worked before where you just tap the space button and then mute goes away, but then all of a sudden that didn't work. I love technology. Yes, I move that we accept the language and recommend accepting it to the board.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I will second it.
Great. Next item, matters from members of the board, reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
I have Director Weiner.
I don't have anything. I tried hard to think of something. I didn't have it.
Perfect. I have nothing either. I think good job so far, everybody.
Great, and our last item is adjournment.
Perfect. That was fast. Good. Good. Then I guess we are adjourned. And I apologize for being late and thank you for your flexibility.
Think how early we would have been done if you'd gotten here. Think how early we would have got done if you'd have been here on time.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.